It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. Really, a lot of people, my listeners, have heard of this book, Chameleo, by our author, Robert Guffey. You can find his website at cryptoscatology.com. Scatology is the science of crap, I believe, right? So we got to get into that. Robert Guffey, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Tell us about yourself. Who is Robert Guffey?
Well, I teach literature, English, creative writing at CSU Long Beach, and I've published 4 books so far. I have 2 more coming out this coming spring. And my first book, as you mentioned, was called Cryptoscatology, which is a word I made up. The subtitle is Conspiracy Theory as Art Form. It's nonfiction. And cryptoscatology, the word literally means crypto, which is Latin for secret, and scatology, which means the study of species.
Scat, yeah.
So you put scat, right? So you put them together, and it's the study of secret species, shall we say?
And most,
so,
yeah.
And I mean, it's a funny word, but at the same time, I mean it seriously in the sense that the book is about examining those phenomena that mainstream society thinks is useless or beneath one's notice. That sort of flies under the cultural radar. And certainly conspiracy theory is one of those things, but it's not the only thing. There's many other things that society considers to be not worthy of notice. And so cryptoscatology is the study of all of those things.
Yeah, usually the things that would benefit us, the common man, are underreported and they are considered too wacky and bizarre to talk about. But most
Absolutely.
Most of your books don't.
That's certainly that's not just in the 21st century. That goes back. Right.
Now, most of your books are fiction, but these a couple of fiction, nonfiction books, and Chameleo, a strange but true story of invisible spies, heroin addiction, and homeland security. This is a true story.
Absolutely true story. I have the last book I published, Until the Last Dog Dies, is a novel, and then my second book was called Spies and Saucers, which was a collection of 3 novellas. That's fiction, and then Cryptoscatology and Chameleo are nonfiction. But even the fiction books, Until the Last Dog Dies and Spies and Saucers, they also sort of deal with these realms, but just coming at it from a different perspective. But Chameleo, yes, is absolutely 100% nonfiction, though some people have read it and said, did all this happen? And the answer is yes, it all happened. The only thing I changed is I changed some names for obvious reasons. People who were in the public spotlight to some degree, I kept their names the same, like Richard Schowengerdt, who's the scientist who plays a large key role in the narrative later on. I kept his name the same. But people who were sort of more private individuals, I changed their names slightly. The main, the main person, the main character, I suppose you could say, the protagonist of the book is my friend Damien. In the book, I name him Dion Fuller. His real name is Damien, and I've had many conversations with him since then. He said he didn't mind me using his actual name in these interviews. So his name is Damien, but he is the key focus of the book.
How long have you known Damien?
I met him on my 16th birthday.
Okay, why don't you do this? Why don't you give us an overview of what this story, Chameleo, is about?
Okay, it's a strange story with a lot of interlocking parts, but it starts in 2003. It starts in July of 2003. In fact, I remember the exact day. It was July 12th. And I know that because that was the same day I was initiated into the 3rd degree of Freemasonry. And I mention that only because it plays an important role later on in the story. But that day after I came back from the initiation, I called Damien. I was living in Torrance, California, and Damien was living in Pacific Beach, which is an area in San Diego, a coastal town. And I called him to tell him, that I had just gone through the initiation, which he knew I was going through, and I couldn't get a hold of him. And so I just left a message expecting him to call me back, which he would normally do within a fair amount of time. But a day passed, 2 days, 3 days. He never called back. I couldn't get a hold of him. A whole week passed, and that was unusual. And after about 7 days, he calls me back. He gets a hold of me and tells me this bizarre story, that his house was a bit of a party house. Damien had been working as a fry cook at Bub's Dive Bar in Pacific Beach. People were coming and going all the time. Damien has had a long and storied history with drugs. I should say that at the beginning as an important part of the story. And so he had a lot of people coming in and out, just sleeping on his couch, sleeping on his floor. They'd stay for a couple of days. They'd leave. That was not uncommon. One guy, this guy whose name was either Lee or Doyle, we still don't know what his real name was. He said his name was Lee, but later on we were told it was actually Doyle. This kid, Lee, was in his early 20s. He had gone AWOL from Camp Pendleton. And when he went to Camp Pendleton, which is a Marine base right near Pacific Beach, and when he went AWOL, he took with him a 9mm Iraqi gun, at least 23 pairs of high-tech night vision goggles, a DoD laptop computer, and an entire truck. And some people have questioned this. How is it possible that he could walk off the base with all that? I don't know. That's what he did. Okay. If you go to YouTube and just punch in a tank in San Diego, you'll see a story that happened a couple years prior to that, where a guy actually stole a whole tank.
Also, he was digging gold.
Actually, mentioned cul-de-sac in the book because I saw the documentary as all this was happening, and I actually suspect that happened. That guy lived in Pacific Beach, the same exact neighborhood where Damien was living. And I actually suspect that there's some interlocking, overlapping scenarios going on there.
Really?
But perhaps I can get into that later.
Yeah.
The guy who directed Cul-de-sac and afterwards under mysterious circumstances, by the way.
That's right, yeah. I tried to get him, yeah.
He also did a documentary about the Iraq, the Gulf War, too.
Exactly, yeah.
So he tells me that so this kid, he let him sleep on his couch, and Damien has a party. All these people come over, and in the middle of the party, Lee pulls out this laptop computer that he'd stolen. At the time, I'd never even heard of the NCIS. It was before the TV show. I didn't even know there was such a thing as an NCIS. So she represents herself as a special agent for this agency, and she wants to the apartment. Damien, who was the son of a narcotics cop, well knew his rights and said, "We'll come back with a warrant." She said, "Okay, we'll be back with a warrant very soon." Damien shuts the door, turns around to everyone at the party, says, "Take your stuff," meaning their drugs. "Go out the back, get out of here, like the cops are coming." They all take their drugs and throw them on Damien's carpet and then run out the back door. The NCIS come back very quickly along with the San Diego Police Department. Though Damien thought it seemed like they were almost there butting heads. It was like Keystone Cops bumping into each other. They weren't really cooperating with each other, the San Diego, the police and NCIS. They didn't care about the drugs at all. The place was littered with drugs. They didn't care about that at all. They seemed most intent on retrieving these night vision goggles that this kid had stolen. And Damien tries to tell him, "Look, I didn't have anything to do with this. I mean, he's just been sitting on my couch for the past 24 hours. That's my only connection to this." They didn't believe that. So they arrest him and Lee, and Damien spends about a week in jail in San Diego. They release him. They keep trying to get information out of him. Well, what is this guy? Lee, what's your connection to him? They thought he was trying to sell this equipment to Al Qaeda or something, and that Damien had something to do with it. And Damien's saying, "No, I had nothing to do with it." And he was not very cooperative during this entire process because Damien's just naturally a non-cooperative person. But finally, They let him go. He goes home. He calls me. He tells me all this happened. I thought, wow, that's weird. Obviously, that's the end of it. They must have realized that you had nothing to do with it, and that's the end of it. A few days later, he calls me back to tell me he's being followed and that he's being harassed in these strange ways, that he's being followed in a way I'd never heard of before, which at the time was people were calling it street theater. Now there's a term called gang stalking, which didn't even exist at the time in 2003. But basically, he's being followed by 9 or 12 jarheads. Photos of the license plates, write down the license plate numbers, take photos and send them to me. And so he goes, okay, it's not going to be that hard to do because they're not even really hiding. They're just being very upfront about it. So he actually sends me a list of license plate numbers and photos. And I happen to know someone who worked at the DMV in Seattle, Washington. So I sent all that stuff over to my friend at the DMV in Seattle, Washington. He runs all the plate numbers, and each one of them comes back as officially non-existent, which was strange to me because I knew they existed because Damien had photographed them. And I knew that even, let's say that he had made up the license plate numbers, which I knew wasn't the case. You'd think you'd hit a real license plate. Or if these were just people living in the neighborhood who he thought they were following him, but they really weren't, still they would come up as real stolen items, and that they were trying to sell them to terrorist organizations. They were accusing of some conspiracy to sell the stolen military equipment.
So then when he was released, was he released on bail, or were the charges still pending, or were they gone?
They released him.
Yeah.
And the woman who arrested him, the special agent, she gave him a card with her name on it. And this was one of the things where I was trying to determine how much of this was real and how much of it was inside Damien's mind.
Right.
And so I asked him for her name and her phone number, and I actually called her. And I spoke to her on the phone, and that transcript of that conversation is in the book. And I said to her, why my friend is telling me that he's being followed ever since you arrested him. And she acted like I was crazy. And I said, is it okay for Damien to leave town? Can he leave town? And she said, I wouldn't advise that. And I said, well, is he being? Are you planning to charge him with anything? Are you planning to arrest him again? Or do you want to hold him for questioning? Why do you advise against him leaving? She said, oh, well, he can leave. I would just advise against it. And then I said, he's telling me that you and your goons are following him around. Is this true? And then she would say things like, he's not currently being followed by anyone who works for my agency. She would respond in this way, in this kind of legalistic, kind of Hillary Clinton-esque language, where you broken back sentences to try to get around just saying a simple yes or no. And the whole conversation went like that. So he was constantly being harassed to the point that they were actually bombarding him with, I don't know exactly how to describe it, except his hallucinations. He would look out the window, and the parking lot that was normally there was no longer there. It was some sort of weird alien landscape that looked like a Boris Vallejo painting with 3 moons in the sky. One day...
Did you see any of this, or this is him telling you?
I did not see any of that. I didn't see any of this visually. He's reporting all this to me as it's happening.
Right.
Now the incident with when they started shooting the acoustic bullets through the walls and everything started shattering, I was actually on the phone with him when that happened. I suppose you could say, well, maybe Damien was crashing things around the room and just telling me that. Well, I suppose that's possible, but I can tell you Damien's been in and out of jail his whole life. I've known him since he was 16. And I've never heard him so frightened. he was like a little girl as these objects were just shattering around him.
Okay, but back to the thing because they arrested him, right? And he was taken to a federal jail or a county jail. Do you know? A city jail?
I believe he was taken to the county jail in San Diego, and they were constantly asking him questions about who is this Lee guy. They wanted him to give information about Lee, and Damien didn't want to give them any information because, as I say, he'd been in and out of jail his whole life, and his whole embedded in his mind was don't snitch, never snitch. He didn't give them any information. He could have cooperated more than he had, but he offered them no information. And so I think that just made them think he was even more guilty, when in fact it was more of a Joseph K. Franz Kafka trial situation where he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time and let the wrong guy stay on his couch at the wrong time.
So then was there an arraignment and a bail hearing for him to get out?
Once they let him go, there was no formal legal proceedings after that.
Okay, and have you tried to look these up under his name in San Diego State Court and see if you can find these things?
I've tried to look up Lee Doyle because I desperately want to know what happened to him. I can find no information about that. But, however, I did find one document that came about in a strange way, which also points to the interesting way that none of this stuff is really covered up. I mean, you can find information because no one's really trying to hide anything. The special agent, there was a reporter interviewed me for a major magazine that then spiked the story. But I gave him the name of the special agent, and I said, go ahead and look her up. You'll see that she's a real person. So he did that, and in the process of doing that, he comes across her resume online because it turned out that the special agent, she left the NCIS soon after all this happened. I don't know if it was a guilty conscience or if she just decided that she wanted to go night vision goggles. Which is something that I had come to my own conclusion about during all of this when Damien tells me that there are invisible people in his house pushing him over, interacting with him, coming into the house. One point he was in his bathroom and he was turning the medicine cabinet, and as he was turning the medicine cabinet, he could see the kind of outline of a person who was there behind him, but you couldn't see them entirely. It was kind of more like sparkly little dots, like what someone sees if they're suffering from a migraine headache, auras as they call them. Sometimes this technology that they had, this optical camouflage technology that they were testing on Damien, because I think what happened is that he pissed off someone during the course of all this, and they decided to just use him as a guinea pig for this optical camouflage technology, which was created by a guy named Richard Schowengerdt, who's a scientist. Who you could talk to if you would like to.
Well, I want to talk to Lee or Damien. I'll go visit Lee in prison. Yeah.
You can talk to Damien if you want.
No, yeah, no. What happened to Damien? What became of him? They never charged him with anything.
Oh no. After I talked to Lita Johnson, and she said, well, he can go. Legally, he can go. I advise him not leaving town. And I said, well, why can he not leave town if you're not going to charge him with anything? And she said, it just might make things difficult later on.
Let me ask a question now. Lita Johnson, right? Have you ever, because I assume you found like her IMDb, her LinkedIn page or something like that, or an online monster resume. Did you ever contact her and say, hey,
that.
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
It was similar to that, that kind of a website, yeah.
So now, have you ever contacted her and said, hey, Lita, remember me? I'm writing a book. Whatever happened to Lee?
I have no interest in talking to her.
Now when
not after the conversation I had with her, which is, you can find that conversation in the book, but I don't think that would lead anywhere. Okay. She wasn't forthcoming at all when I spoke to her in 2003, so I don't think she's going to be any more forthcoming in 2018.
So now, since you've written the book in 2015, has anybody around this contacted you?
Oh, you mean other people who experienced similar things?
No, like people, maybe the government who would prosecute in the case, prosecutors saying, hey, and I was involved in this, anything like that? No. I don't expect them to. Okay.
I've had interesting experiences with FOIA and Freedom of Information Act, and it's interesting what they choose to give you and what they choose not to give you.
Okay. Now, your friend Damien. Now you had an interest in these kind of topics or this kind of field before Damien came into contact with this and was exposed to this kind of problem, right?
Yes, to some extent. I had never heard of the whole gang stalking phenomenon. That was completely new to me. I didn't understand what that was. That's why I thought he was paranoid at first, because I'd never heard of this kind of operation. However, I was familiar with MK Ultra, mind control, that kind of information, because I had been friends with Walter Boart, who wrote a book called Operation Mind Control in 1977, which is, in retrospect, perhaps one of the key books of the 20th century. But Walter Boart, he researched mind control to a great degree, and he had a cousin who had come back from Vietnam with his mind just completely scrambled. And this led Walter Boart to investigate all this kind of MK Ultra, Louis Jolyon West, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, Dr. Jose Delgado kind of mind manipulation. And I had met Walter through friends. And so I knew Walter. I had spoken to him many times. Unfortunately, he died in 2008, January 2008, of cancer. And so because I knew Walter and had read Operation Mind Control, I was well familiar with the whole MK Ultra, the technology, for example, the Patrick Flanagan neurophone, which enables you to implant voices in people's minds and things like that. Because I was aware of things like that, I think I was more willing to listen to what Damien was telling me, because I think anyone else would have assumed that he was crazy. And also, I should point out that I don't deny the fact that Damien is not a credible witness. I completely agree that Damien is not in any way a credible witness, which is one reason why I think that they chose him to target him. I think that that's standard operating procedure. I think that they often target people who are either marginalized or they're suffering from mental illness or they're drug addicts. So if they come out and say that this stuff is happening to them, you will immediately assume that either they're crazy or they're on drugs or both. And some of the stuff that he was explaining to me, any other rational person would say, well, that's just a hallucination. I mean, right. For example, I mean, the invisible people. I mean, I know that this is a symptom of schizophrenia, going back centuries.
Or meth, meth use, meth psychosis.
Absolutely. And however, in this case, since for about through 2003, 2004, and into 2005, I still was not entirely sure if any of this was actually happening to him. I mean, I did have some evidence, like I said, of the DMV evidence, things like other things. But
let me ask you a question. Back to the DMV. Have you ever gone to a second source with those plate numbers and tried to get them, maybe someone in California, to run it there in the state database and see if those plates came up or anything, or even online?
I had this one guy. The only reason I sent it to him was simply because I knew him.
Right.
I've never attempted to replicate that. The license plate numbers are in. I printed them in the book. Oh,
that's interesting. Has anybody else bothered to look them up?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I would love to hear information about that. I'd love for someone to replicate it.
Sure. And once again, if I were to look up in the criminal court records, I wouldn't find Damien's record in there of being arrested and charged with anything. He was just held and then released.
He was held for about 6 or 7 days and then released. That's right.
Okay. Now all this, when he's telling you all this stuff, and his experience, all this, did you ever go over there and say, "Hey, let's set up some cameras and let's go here and set up some recorders and let's get this"?
I absolutely suggested setting up a camera. Now, keep in mind, this was 2003. There's all this other chaos going on. So Damien was not in any position to really do that. to set up any kind of surveillance technology. He's not a private detective or anything like that. He didn't have access to that kind of technology. I would have loved for some sort of surveillance evidence of that. I don't know what you would find, except you would see photographs of people outside his house. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what that would prove, really. In terms of the invisibility technology, or the optical camouflage technology is the actual term for it. The reason I started looking into that was because Damien was so insistent that he was seeing these people in the house that were kind of like outlines. And so obviously I was skeptical of that. Then Damien was going online and he was trying to look for anything that might seem similar to what he had seen in his apartment. And